Hey everyone, Sleepy Reader here. I've decided to shoot my review this way because I feel like this week I'm going to be focusing a lot on the art in the way I was thinking about comic books. My pick of the week, I don't usually really do pick of the week, but anyway, has to be Batman 14, which I didn't even love the first time I read it, mostly because I wasn't in such a horror comics mood, and it's definitely kind of a horror comic book. But when I reread it, I really loved it, and you know, I guess it gets kind of boring to say over and over how great Greg Capullo is, but he truly is, and I feel sometimes like he's making comic book history, or putting together comic book history, just bringing the best of so many things to what he does in Batman. And as has been said elsewhere, this is kind of a moving the pieces of the game forward, getting them into place. And as such, that should be a really mediocre read. But there's still so much good stuff going on that it's a great read. And you know, really this probably should have shared, I would have thought it would end up sharing sort of first place in my mind with Saga and Punk Rock Jesus. But for various reasons, those two fell behind a little bit. And this really took off in my mind. I love the way we see the armor underneath Batman's costume as it's been disintegrated off. Has been pointed out by other people, Batman thinking about the chemistry involving the Joker and how it created the Joker. I mean, page after page, you can just look at this artwork over and over again. I think the coloring has gotten even darker than in previous issues, and I guess that matches the story. I do worry when they get too dark. I just find pages that are too many really dark pages cover up the artwork. But so far so good on that count. You do sort of think there could be more light sources or whatever to give a little bit of more splash of color on these pages. Here there's a bit of a light source there, and then it gets darker elsewhere. Just look how good all the art is. And the thing is, we see the Joker's plan kind of unveiling, but we also see Batman's psychology. His response to it is clear, even though he's this tightly clenched person who doesn't let too much out. And this conversation with Robin is great, where he doesn't want the whole Bat family involved or knowing what's going on and going after the Joker. This could be Batman's big mistake, where he plays into the Joker. Maybe if they worked as a team, they could get him more quickly and save more lives. I don't know, and I don't know if that's a point Scott Snyder's trying to make or not. Yeah, if anyone out there is not reading Batman right now, go back. I know there's second editions, at least, of Batman 13. Pick that up. This is just, you know, this is cutting edge, mainstream, I guess, superhero comics right now. Superhero horror comics. The Joker's, you know, we've got a long section where the Joker does a lot of sort of talking and explaining himself in his own crazy way. But it's just wonderfully done. It's wonderfully entertaining to read. It's all kind of, you know, it just strikes the right note time after time, and you can tell that Scott Snyder has put so much thought into especially who Batman is, but who all these people are. The one thing is, I don't know what's going on there. Is that an explosion? That's just the waterfall coming down behind them. Was the waterfall there before? Because we got a full page shot. There wasn't a waterfall there, but so I'm not quite sure what we're looking at here. That's my only complaint about this issue, really. And you know, they've sucked me in. I keep thinking, if this isn't good enough, I'm going to drop it because I don't really want to get $3.99 books. It's 22 pages of the primary story and then 24 pages of the primary story. Is it 24 or 22? I'm not sure. I think it's 28 pages total. So I guess it's 22 pages of the main story and then this backup story, which was okay. It's a little odd getting information this way constantly, you know, little additional bits of information to the story that in these backup stories. I liked it pretty well with Harlequin last time. I was a little less thrilled by it with the Penguin. I'm a little less clear on what the Joker was doing with the Penguin. Like, I know he was manipulating him, but to what end, I just wasn't sure. And maybe more will be revealed on that. You know, this is a fantastic issue. The previous issue, number 13, was kind of like one of the best comics I'd read all year. And this one's a slight drop down. So you could say this is a 5-star comic book, and the last one was, you know, a 5+ comic book. So kind of odd for me, I guess, to start with the very best book, and then I'll talk about some bad books and then go back to some good books. Probably already talked too long. But, you know, knocked it out of the park here, even though I didn't think they could. It doesn't say that this is part of Death of the Family, but this Batman and Robin definitely is part of Death in the Family, and it feels like the Batman and Robin book is jumping the shark. Something just is going really wrong here. Mark over in England, Ghost Critic, is planning to drop Batman and Robin, and that's completely understandable. I'll stick with it a bit longer because there's been some issues that I really like, and I really like the main artist, although he's doing weaker work here, and it's again mixed in with the art of another artist whose style just does not fit at all. There we go. Giorello, I think. It's not a bad art style, but it's so jarring. It's so off from the main artist, from Pat Gleason, Thomas Giorello. And I think it would be fine to give him his own book, but he doesn't make a good partner with Gleason. And there's too much silliness in the story, and it just doesn't really hang out, and the revelation at the end of who's behind it all, which ties it back into A Death in the Family. Maybe this book is just being ruined by Death in the, you know, while Death in the Family is excellent in Batman, it may, as crossovers often do, just kind of weaken other books. I hope that they don't feel like every time Scott Snyder does an arc, they have to tie all the other Bat books into it. I think that would be a bad pattern. And I feel like Batman and Robin could be really good if it had room to grow. And it seems like the second time it's been kind of hurt, although this time even more, by the whole crossover thing. But if the poor quality of the stories keeps up, I will have to drop it too eventually. But at least it's a $2.99 book, so I'm willing to give it a longer chance. On Fantastic Four at my shop, I guess sometimes variant covers cost extra and sometimes they don't. This one didn't, and for some reason I didn't like the main cover, so I grabbed this. But the more I live with this baby cover with Baby Galactus, which has nothing whatsoever to do with the story, the less entertaining I find it. The baby cover thing is not for me, I guess. There is really good Mark Bagley artwork on the inside. And I was quite impressed. I haven't always loved Mark Bagley. Sometimes I have and sometimes I haven't. But I felt this was a weakish issue. You know, not as bad as Batman and Robin. But great art. You know, if I didn't know better looking at this, I would have thought it was, what's his name? Now his name drops out of my head. Alan Davis. I would have thought this was Alan Davis artwork. And Anyway, the art is definitely a peak good, sort of post Neil Adams artwork. And, you know, for instance, it's real clever here to have Johnny take a date into the negative zone, and I'm sure it will tie in with things going on in FF later on. But the joke about him making a big deal about giving her his real phone number, I thought that was pretty lame, and I don't like this idea of taking Johnny Storm totally into just this shallow guy. In my mind, he's half shallow but half a real romantic, and has some earnestness about him, and this was just too silly. And the same goes for the Yancey Street thing, where the thing ends up on YouTube, a trick done by the Yancey Street, and that both of those jokes should have been jokes for just a panel, I guess, if you're going to do those kind of jokey things. And just a lot of things seemed overplayed here and didn't hit the right note for me. It's sort of an interesting premise with Mr. Fantastic needing to search through the unknown universes to find a cure for what's ailing him and possibly the rest of the family, and that he doesn't tell the rest of the family and tells them we're just sort of going on a family excursion through time and space. So interesting setup, but it just didn't work for me. I just didn't buy into it somehow. I didn't even buy into that they would be hanging around inside this dinosaur's mouth talking. The dinosaur's not swallowing them. I guess, you know, if everything else worked, I would accept the silliness of that situation. But just too many things just didn't work right for me. It's interesting here, they've got 1 year from now, and by the end of the issue, we find out they're planning a 1-year journey. Why Mr. Fantastic knows he needs a 1-year journey to solve his problems, I don't know. But anyway, so obviously something's going to have happened 1 year from now. That must be Ben Grimm, and he's not the Thing anymore. Perhaps they're all human again, without special powers. That would be interesting. But these images also, these beam-like things evoke the cosmic rays that originally turned them into the Fantastic Four. So I don't know what that means. Maybe they'll go through some new rays and get powers. I don't know. So that's kind of intriguing. Also seems like a cheat. Other than that, you know, maybe this would be a pretty good jumping-on book for people who don't already know the Fantastic Four. Yeah, probably. But it just didn't thrill me very much. It just, you know, beat after beat after beat of the story sort of struck the wrong note for me. Here's a story that I found to be very good. X-Treme X-Men number 6, but I had a problem with the art and the color. And the art isn't terrible, but there's two different artists here. The first artist here looks pretty good, but the coloring to me obscures a lot. I can't even see. That must be a tree there. And I can't see very well the colors in his shirt, or the lines in his shirt under those colors in that spot. Those are just examples. It's kind of neat. I like the world that this version of Nightcrawler comes from, which is like the Apple computer, United States of California paradise, but then gets destroyed by artificial intelligence coming to life. And then I think the artist switches after there, maybe? And this artist really doesn't work as well for me, mostly just because of the way the characters look. That doesn't look at all. I mean, that Dazzler is so far off from any other Dazzler we've seen before, you know, where whole head shape and body shape is different. And I guess you can just say that's artist style, but the style bothered me then. In terms of coloring, again, like see here, if you can see that on camera, is is this version of Wolverine fighting with a dinosaur, and his clothes are brown and the dinosaur's clothes are brown, and it's just hard to pick up what's going there. The coloring in here just made me work too hard to figure everything out. And the art, and that combined with this second artist whose style just seemed too far off from the characters. They all have this same long nose all of a sudden. But it was a good story, and I certainly, this is a case of the story trumping my dislike for the art. And I guess the art must have told the story okay, because other than little bits of confusion because of the dark coloring, I didn't have too much of a problem. And it in all the pulpy silliness of it, it also brings up some interesting moral issues, and the idea that the robots have become sentient beings, and although they've built their society on other sentient beings that they've killed, most of them are innocent. It's kind of like us here in the United States, who, in a sense, built our civilization on the bodies of large numbers of American Indians, Native Americans, who've died in the past. But most of us are innocent of those crimes, except for the fact that we live in this society. So the robots are kind of like that. They've wiped out the humans on this world, this version of Earth. And in the middle of it comes Dazzler and Wolverine, ready to, I guess, kill as many robots as they have to rescue Kurt. They haven't been in on this discussion of the sentience of the robots. So anyway, interesting stuff. A good issue with bad art, basically. I don't even like the cover. So, yeah. Frankenstein, Agent of Shade, part of the Rot World. This is great art, as it always is for me with Alberto Ponticelli, with a decent enough, as crossovers go, you know, with Frankenstein, Agent of Shade being kind of the minor character who is forced into this crossover in a sense. They do a pretty good job of making it into an entertaining, fun, kind of light story, mostly involving Frankenstein and this vampire character, whose exact name I can't remember. That's kind of not a good sign that they haven't made him a memorable enough character in the past. He becomes like a pretty memorable character in this issue, and we get lots of big scenes with them fighting giant monsters that are, you know, wonderfully drawn. Alberto Ponticelli is like the perfect artist for this book. So yeah, if you're reading Rot World, definitely pick this up because it's just a fun little side story in Rot World. And if you're already reading Frankenstein, Agent of Shade and not reading Rot World, I think it's a bit of a disappointment because, you know, Frankenstein, Agent of Shade is going out just as a side story of Rot World. But I am reading Rot World, and it's fun. It's definitely fun to read this, and it's really nice. Just looking at the art again now, I'm really enjoying it. And Frankenstein and the vampire character and this woman who's his sort of ocean-dwelling friend are all really good characters. So I hope they all show up again. I know at least Frankenstein will. I hope, and I noticed that since Rot World, Frankenstein, Agent of Shade sales have gone up considerably. Still not very high, but percentage-wise, a big jump. I keep fantasizing that they'll decide to continue this, but I think once canceled, it would take a long time for it to come back. More good art. I didn't talk about Demon Knights number 13 last month, which was kind of an oversight on my part, plus I failed to read it, you know, really fast. But starting with the 0 issue, Demon Knights has been getting better. One of the few things that got better with the 0 issue. And it continues to be really good. All the characters are in hell, and there's been clever little details of their experiences in hell. They're each one getting their own personal hell designed for them. And I think that Paul Cornell is still the writer on this, but the change has been the artist, Bernard Chang, and I feel like I don't know if Paul Cornell's upping his game for an artist that is more simpatico with him, or the artist actually brings out the elements in his script better so that the story is more clear and just works a little better. There's kind of a fluffiness about Paul Cornell, a light touch where he's not, it feels like he's not taking things too seriously, and he's also sort of expecting you to follow his sense of humor maybe a little more than I do. So I don't always get exactly what he means by everything, but I feel like I'm getting a lot more now that Bernard Chang is the artist here, and I wouldn't have thought I would love his art, but it's, for this story, it's just turned out to be a really good art style. Also really good coloring, I think, accents this art very nicely by the Brazilian colorist Marcelo Mialo. So we're getting a lot of plot elements. If you have been following this from the beginning, we're getting a lot of plot elements coming together with the return of the questing queen. I had thought the questing queen was the same as, not Mordred, because I think Mordred is working for her, but I thought she was the same as, who's Mordred's mother? Anyway, she's someone different. So that was kind of a surprise to me. I guess that's one of those details that I'm not picking up from the way Paul Cornell and the previous artist managed to tell the story. The elements were more confusing. So it's becoming more clear to me. And Paul Cornell's leaving in a few issues, but it's probably not a bad thing because the new writer is the writer for X-O Man of War, who's been doing a fantastic job with X-O Man of War. So I'm looking forward to seeing what he does with Demon Knights. So the story that began in the shaggy dog of a story that began in Demon Knights with #1 will be coming to some kind of conclusion here, which I'm also looking forward to. And as far as I know, Bernard Chang is staying on the book, so that will give it some consistency as writers change. So this was mostly a very good week. There were those two comics that I didn't love, Fantastic Four and Batman and Robin, particularly Batman and Robin. Saga was a good issue, but it was not as good as sort of, I think, maybe waiting 2 months, and there have been so many good issues in this series. It didn't seem as meaty. We didn't get as much. Well, we got we got some background on Marco's world and his family, so that was kind of interesting. And we got some conflict between the in-laws, but it just didn't feel as fresh and as clever or as sort of meaty and new as the other issues, or as I remember the other issues. Has her art style changed a little bit? I feel like it has. I think we'll be watching, she's a fairly new artist, I believe, Fiona Staples. So we may be watching her art style evolve before us as we hopefully follow Saga for years. I skipped a page there because there was a giant naked creature with a giant hanging scrotum. And yeah, you can't get that kind of thing anywhere else but in Saga, and that I want to see a little more of that creature, even though I'm not eager to see his scrotum again. And they did that as a full page picture. So it was a decent issue of Saga. I wonder, as things move along, even though they're really good at cliffhangers at the end of each issue and the like, this has got to move more towards the long-term goals of its story now that Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona know that it's a successful book and they'll be doing it for a long time. So the story may begin to shift gears a little, and each individual issue may be a little less, pack a little less punch. I hope I'm wrong. But it was decent. Another book that could have, or was a contender for best book of the month or the week is Punk Rock Jesus #5. We're getting near the close of our story. There's just a few things in here. Now Jesus, Chris, has escaped from his his reality TV show where he'd been growing up on it, and has become a punk rocker and joined a band. He's 15 years old, and very quickly the band becomes the biggest thing in the world. And then they win the MIT scientists back them. They win the Nobel Peace Prize. I think it's when they won the Nobel Peace Prize. I already found it a little off-putting that they became this enormous, huge band in a month or two. Because I don't know, the whole punk thing, it just seems like it should be more of an underground story in a way. Like overnight they become U2 or something. More than U2, I mean, but the ultimate version of U2, respected by scientists around the world and given the Nobel Peace Prize and all that. And so it just seemed to have gone a little too far for me. On the other hand, I just worship this guy's art. There's just panel after panel after panel of great detailed art. It's like, how long did it take him to draw this? It's just kind of mind-boggling. I'm not sure if I have much more time left on the battery. Anyway, so, if that Batman issue hadn't been out, this would have been the best issue. And if it hadn't kind of slightly pushed things too far for me on the plot, it might have beaten out Batman. The artwork, we're getting such good artwork. Greg Capullo and this artwork and Fiona Staples and Alberto Ponticelli. I'm getting it for the books that I'm reading. Just great artist after great artist, and this one may take the cake. It's just every single panel, you're blown away by what he's doing. Yeah, so almost, really a 5-star book also, but it just didn't quite click with me as much as previous issues did. I think it'll still, be an utterly fantastic trade paperback when it comes out, or trade hardback. And I'm so glad the art's in black and white. I don't think a colorist could improve this. So I think a colorist could only possibly get in the way. Yeah. And last but not least, but not the best book by any means, but just sort of this interesting anomaly, the Once and Future Tarzana one-shot from Dark Horse Comics. It's got about 28 pages of art. I think there's 1 or 2 ads in the whole comic. And it's by Thomas Yates, who in my mind was a very minor DC artist back in the 80s maybe, and I hadn't really kept track of him. And I guess now he draws Prince Valiant, the comic strip. But this must have been just a work of, love, not for, because, a Tarzan Dark Horse comic book, it's not going to reach an enormous audience. But Thomas Yates has put so much into every panel, and it's all small panels, all, he had a co-colorist, so he had a strong hand in the coloring, and it's beautifully colored, and the color and the line work are seamlessly meshed, so that at times it looks like a line drawing, at times it looks like a painting. There are moments where it looks like Frank Frazetta or Roy Krengle. It's just such a visual treat. I don't know how much you can see here of them fighting these human-headed spider creatures, the mastodon, and it's a pretty good story. It's a good story, but it's written in an odd way, and it's very philosophical, and it's full of quotes from Thoreau and other things like that. And there seems to often be like a philosophical discussion amongst these barbarian characters. And it's interesting, but the writing isn't quite up to its ambitions. So it gets kind of muddled in its philosophical and plot kind of discussions. But it's still well